Good morning, how are we doing this morning? We're glad that you're here, whether in person or joining us online this morning. I feel like my heart's already full from our worship this morning. I don't know how you feel, but just grateful for the words that we're able to sing together as a church, and ultimately with the hero always here being the person of Jesus. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 1 this morning. If you need a Bible, we have some free ESV Genesis journal Bibles in the back table back there. We'd love for you to grab one, and you can follow along with us in that, so feel free to do that. In 1980, or since 1989, we've had more than 2,500 exonerations in our country. And of those 2,500 people, they've served a combined 23,000 years in prison for crimes that they never committed. And the person who has served the longest sentence for a crime he didn't commit was a guy named Richard. Last name was Phillips. He's actually a Michigander. I think he lives in Detroit. He was sentenced to prison for a murder he never committed, and he spent 46 years in jail before he got out. He went in the 1970s into prison in his 20s, and he got out at age 71, and he had to relearn how to live life. He had to relearn how to drive. He had to learn again how to actually just shop at Meijer. Like, everything was taken. He was defined by the crime he never committed. He was defined his whole life by being stuck behind bars. But here's what is good, at least, is that he was exonerated. He got a fresh start. At age 71, he received a clean slate. If given a clean slate, what do you want to define your life moving forward? If you were given a clean slate today, right now, on this beautiful, looks like it'll be a great October day, and you could start over with the things that define your life, a clean slate right now, what would you want to define your life moving forward? You see, I think all of us have fallen into a trap of defining ourselves by what we do versus what God declares. We have people all over our city that define themselves by their name. They got a good Dutch name, you know what I mean? Like, that's their thing. We have people that define themselves by their gender or by their politics or by their sexuality. We often define ourselves by our skill sets, our jobs, our hobbies. We have incredibly talented people here at Redemption Church. I think of business owners and electricians and lawyers and police officers and mechanics and teachers and doctors. We can define ourselves by what we do. I think we often define ourselves by all the different hats and roles that we have, by our relationships. As father, mother, husband, wife, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, friend, coworker, employee, all of these things can define who we are. I think we often define ourselves by our greatest successes, our greatest wins. I think we often define ourselves by our greatest failures, our greatest sins. I think we often define ourselves, right, by resentment that we have or current trouble that is happening in our life. I think we define ourselves by failed expectations, and we define ourselves by present disappointments, and we define ourselves by all sorts of things. You see, often, I think what we allow to define ourselves leaves us feeling defeated. But what if today was the day every one of us could have a clean slate? What if today was the day that you could have a clean slate of what actually defines your life? What if today was the very day you and I could, all of us together, could have a fresh start? Because here's what I believe. As we jump back in to the Genesis story, the creation story, and we look at day 6 when God creates man, I am convinced that if we see what God has for us, we would choose to be defined exactly as he created us to be. We wouldn't want it any other way. You see, when God defines you, it brings clarity in the chaos of life. And so if given a clean slate, what do you want to define your life moving forward? Let's pick it up in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And here's the first thing we're going to see that we would choose: to be created with a God-designed identity. We're going to read. Let's look at verse 26. It says, "Then God said, Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with its seed and its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made. And behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day. He made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. If you're with us the last couple weeks, we looked at the first 5 days of creation, and we saw a lot of patterns if you were here last week. We saw patterns of threes, we saw patterns of sevens in chapter 1, we saw all sorts of patterns of tens. But of all the patterns that we saw in the Genesis created order, the one that we emphasized the most was this, that God spoke, creation listened, and it was good. That's the pattern. That's the pattern that's most important. Yet when I look at his word, it brings incredible clarity. And we know that we've defined clarity as the result of God being first in our life. And we've defined chaos in this series as anything void of God in our life. And so here's what's true though. When I look at the pattern in the word, that's not the pattern I see in the world, because the pattern I see in the world is this, is that God speaks, creation ignores, and it's bad. So we have this tension that exists. But here's the thing, God's going to speak again. And I believe if we listen and don't ignore God in this moment, it's going to give us ridiculous clarity in our life. And so notice what he says in verse 26 again. He says, then God said, let us make man in our image. Notice the first two words of the statement, let us. Here's what's crazy. You and I are getting a glimpse of a divine conversation that happened between the Godhead. This is the Trinity talking here. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, and you and I are getting a glimpse of what they're talking about, because they're having a conversation about creating and then inviting man into relationship with them. Listen, why would God create at all? I mean, God has no needs, right? Like, he's perfect in every way. We've established heavily in this series that God is infinite and God is eternal. He's Elohim. He's majestic and powerful in every single way. Why would he create it all? God is surrounded. Let us. He is surrounded by perfect community, and he's not creating because he's lonely. Do you know why you exist? Do you know why you're breathing right now? You exist to have relationship with God. God created to invite us into relationship with him. You were created for this very specific purpose. God created you. What's the point? God does something different in us and for us that he does for animals or fish or birds. He creates us in his image. What does that mean? The word image here means imago Dei. You've probably heard that before. Now, we've established if we're like God and we're created in the image of God, we know that God is eternal. That we've established that. So that means this, that every single one of us is going to live for eternity somewhere. The question is just where. Will it be in heaven with God, or will it be in hell absent of God? Because that's a legit tension with us, everyone going to live forever. You see, God has created us with the highest honor. To be in his image means we're made to represent him and mirror him to our world. You see, anytime someone creates something, the designer is dictating and defining what they've created and what it was made to do. I don't know who made the clock, for example, but the clock wasn't created to be a vacuum. Right? This doesn't make sense, right? The person who created batteries didn't create batteries to be nails. Again, it just really doesn't make sense. I don't think Henry Ford designed his first car, right, to float across Lake Michigan. Like that wasn't the created purpose of the designer of what was actually made. Computers are not meant to be footballs unless it's a PC. You just go ahead and give that thing a chuck, okay? Vegetables were not created to be food. Maybe I took that too far. Okay. The designer dictates what they created. What's the point? Here's the point. Your identity has already been decided by the Creator. He's designed you in a very specific way. God has given every one of us life, and we have to take responsibility for the life that God has actually given us. And the problem is many people in our city are wasting their God-given life. God has designed you to live life, and the life that God has designed you to live, for many of us, is not the life that we're actually living. He has made you unique. He has made you beautiful. He has made you exactly as He wants you. You were created by God, to reflect God, to enjoy God. All of this is true for every single one of us. I don't know about you, but I don't want to look in the rearview mirror of my life. I don't want to be on my deathbed and be like, man, I really messed this life up that God gave me. I wish I could go back and make different choices and do things in a different way. God has given you a life to live. And the only way you're going to live that actual life He's created you to live is if you find yourself in a place where what He declares over you is most important. You see, Imago Dei simply means this, that we are made to represent God. Well, what does it mean to represent God? We've said this before, but I think it's us making His invisible attributes visible. Listen, there are 3 descriptions of God in the Bible that end in a noun. I've mentioned these the last couple weeks, right? God is spirit, John chapter 4, right? God is light, 1 John 1:5, and God is love, 1 John chapter 4. And so when we think about God being love, which is why He's creating, because He has a love for you and I, listen, God created because He loves, but we get to then mirror and reflect His love to one another. God is kind, so what do? We reflect His kindness. God is gracious, so therefore we are called to image Him, to mirror Him, to reflect Him, and we then are gracious. You see, we represent God through the authority that He has given us. We are called to rule. We read that, right? Rule and to have dominion. What does that mean? Listen, we are called to care for the planet. We are called to be in charge of creation. We've been made to think, to talk, to create, to make plans. We can help. We can speak. We can reason. We can empathize. We can organize. Animals can't do these things. Your dog cannot do these things. Your cat, never mind. We're called to represent God in everything we do. We can think, we can feel, we have emotions. All of this represents who our God actually is. We were created to actually know God. Another thing that it means to be created in God's image is that we were created to be sons and daughters of His. We were to be defined our life by who He is and what He says and what He actually declares. And just because God created you doesn't mean that you actually know God. If you've been with us, we talked heavily last week about how God formed creation and then He filled creation. Here's the point. Just because God has formed you in His image and His likeness does not mean that He has filled you. Do you know Him? Because what's so different about humans versus animals is that God actually invades human hearts. His Spirit invades our lives. He doesn't do that with my dog. It's amazing what He does. It's amazing how He loves. You see, God is for you. Are you His? By the way, this is also what's different between a Christian and a non-Christian. A Christian is one who's filled with the Spirit. A non-Christian doesn't have the beauty of that reality. We have God in us, created in His image, the Imago Dei, to reflect Him and mirror Him to a dying world. Listen, in our world, we can see chaos in lots of ways, right? And I think one way we've seen chaos in our world is that our world, which makes sense to me because it's the world, right? It's void of God. The world has often elevated animal rights over human rights. Is that fair? That's not how God actually created it to be. In fact, in day 6, when God creates animals, if you remember, we talked about rhythms of 10 last week, and the phrase, according to their kinds, appears many times, meaning this: animals were created according to their kinds. Humans were created one of a kind. It's very different than what the world says and how the world actually lives. An eternal and infinite God has created you and has already decided your identity. He created you because he wants you to know him. And the tension for you and I is we have to decide, are we going to listen or are we going to ignore? If given a clean slate, what do you want to define your life moving forward? Here's the second thing I think that we would all say. If we're starting over, we'd want this. We want to be blessed by a God-given value. Let's look again in verse 27. It says, so God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them. Verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding its seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the ground, and everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and morning, the 6th day. Notice what it said in verse 28, the first phrase. After God creates in his image and his likeness, what does he say? It says, and God blessed them. And God blessed them. What's the first thing God does after he creates? He blesses. And notice the phrase that we read, I have given you every, he says. Like that's the blessing. I've given you absolutely everything. Here's the point. Adam and Eve did not have to work to eat. God says, I've given it to you. These plants are going to produce food for you. Everything you need for your body is going to be found right here in this garden that I'm actually going to place you in. So by the way, we're seeing a gospel pattern being developed here, and that is this. God does the work, we get the blessing. Is that not true at the cross? Is that not what's true of the empty tomb today? That God did the work, you and I, we actually receive and we get the blessing. You see, when God does the work, the result is always good. The word blessing is used over 400 times in the Bible. It's used 80 times in Genesis alone. And so how does God bless them? Look at what it says, the next phrase. And God blessed them, and God said to them. God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. I've given you every tree, every fruit, every seed that you will need. Listen, God blesses by speaking to us. And we know this, that God speaks to us and we can hear him through his word and we can hear him through his son. But the tension for you and I is we have to decide, do we want to listen to God or do we want to ignore God? You are going to be held accountable for what God has said. Each of us individually are going to be held accountable for what God has said. Are you listening? We talked heavily in this series in the first week about what does it mean when it says, in the beginning, God. It means this, that God is first in everything and in all things. And so if you want clarity in your life, that starts when God's actually first. And a way that we make God first is by actually listening. So if you're listening, God can be first. If you're ignoring, you are going to be first. Listening brings clarity. Ignoring brings chaos. And so if you are not listening, you are by default ignoring. And you're missing out on blessing. You see, one way that we see value here is this, is that the invaluable one actually values you, meaning this, every person matters. Every person matters. And it doesn't matter if we all agree on every cultural issue. Every person matters to God. And so this text, I think, speaks to many cultural issues that have resulted in chaos in our world. We noticed, right, that our God is eternal and that our God is infinite. But we can also look back at verse 27 and we can see this, that God created with two genders in mind. Did you catch that? Male and female is how God actually created. He created with two genders in mind. Yet in our world of chaos, because the sin exists, these things are all blurred, right? There's confusion that exists on this kind of stuff. Listen, because sin exists, people question their God-given gender. And so in our world, right, we're being told to use proper pronouns, right? He, him, she, her, they, them. All of this is the result of confusion that exists because sin exists and it's made everything chaotic in our world. So just to shoot straight with you, what matters most right now is not my truth and it's not your truth. What matters most is God's truth. And God has actually spoken. And he's spoken with great clarity. And he wants to bless everybody in this way. And he's given us a gender. It was decided by him. Gender is a God idea. Therefore, it was absolutely God-given. And here's what's beautiful about the rules of gender that God has given us is that he gave us the gift of gender before sin entered the world. There's no confusion in the garden about gender. It didn't actually exist then. The confusion wasn't actually there. And so here's my encouragement to our church, which I think I said this summer as well. But the way that we represent God in our world with someone who doesn't identify with their biological gender is to remember this, that they too were created in the image of God and have incredible value before the King. What our world needs more than anything, church, is not for non-Christians to act like Christians. We need to stop being bothered when people that don't know Jesus don't act like they know Jesus. They're not going to do that. What needs to be clear in our world is that we need Christians to start acting like Christians again. We represent God in everything we say and in everything we do in our hearts and in our life. And so while you and I might have clarity in what's happening in our world, while we know what it looks like to have God first and have everything flow underneath that, the world doesn't actually have that. And so the way that we win the world, right, is not through condemnation, but it's through grace and truth. I know the world doesn't give us the same value back, right? The world destroys Christianity. The world destroys the Bible. And you know what we get to do? We get to receive their condemnation, and in return, we get to give grace and truth. Listen, we speak truth for sure, but we do it in a way that reflects the beauty of our God, right, who speaks value to every person. What an opportunity we have to be image bearers in the world that we live in. Do you agree? God has created us in such a way to reflect him and the chaoticness that we experience all around us. It is nuts. We shouldn't be shocked by that. They don't know Jesus. They don't know Jesus. We know the truth. Our God is first. He reigns as king. Everything follows under him. And we get to represent him and the world that we live in. And so what does that actually look like? Listen, when we love other people, even if we don't agree politically, we don't agree with maybe any choices they make in their life, listen, love is to assign value. And so when we treat someone right, we're assigning a God-given value that they already have to them, that they might not know they actually have. What an opportunity we have, church. Every person has value. Every person has worth. It's already been determined before sin entered the world. And so no matter someone's ethnicity, social status, family heritage, everyone matters to God. Yet we can see all the gender issues and sexuality issues that cause chaos in our life. We can also see that racism has caused ridiculous issues in our life. Look again at verse 26 with me. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. The word us and our, we've already highlighted, is we're being invited into a conversation with the Trinity, right? But what's happening in the Trinity and what's present right here is that the Trinity is the Father, Son, and Spirit, is three equal, co-eternal, distinct persons. That means this, the Trinity has always had perfect unity in their own diversity. Perfect unity in their own diversity. Always has. Before creation even existed, diversity and equality existed in the Godhead. And so God created with diversity in mind. And so the Trinity speaks value and worth and dignity to every human being. And so when God created, he did so with gender in mind. He did so with worth, value in mind, but he also did with color in mind. Creation speaks to the worth of all people, equality in diversity. God created one human race with two genders and many ethnicities. And we can turn to Revelation 7 and you can read what heaven is going to be like when it says there's going to be people from every tribe, every nation, every tongue surrounding the throne, all singing praises to Jesus. It's going to be incredible. But why does racism exist? Racism exists because the world is chaos, and God is not first. And while racism exists out there, it should never exist in the church. Because we know this, that every person has value. Every person matters. And if this is true, church, let me just say this. If every person has value and every person has worth, no matter what they choose to do with their sexuality, no matter anyone's color, everyone has value, everyone has worth, that means this: no murder. No murder, no homicide, euthanasia, suicide, no abortion. Coming up here in our election, the abortion issue is a big deal. Do you know that? Are you paying attention? There's a proposal coming out, Proposal 3, and the wording is incredibly long and really confusing. Here's one heartbeat of the proposal. It's to make abortion legal up through birth. Church, we vote no on that. Other parts of the proposal are to allow kids, maybe 10 years old, don't have to have parents' consent to actually have a sex change. We vote no on this proposal. So no matter where you stand, whether you're Republican or Democrat, here's the issue. God's view matters most. He is first. And so we must vote and get out in numbers with this vote this November. Do you hear me? Let me make this observation that I've made about abortion before. That abortion and the gospel communicate value and worth in opposite ways. Abortion says this: you lay down your life for me. The gospel says this: Jesus said it, I will lay down my life for you. That's a different message, which means that this is not just a political issue. It's not just a moral issue. It's a gospel issue. Why? Because we know in the womb, there's a God who declares that he actually loves. And when you watch, I get on Twitter and see what's happening, right? You can see all these debates happening. You can see people standing outside the White House or in different cities, marching down streets, holding signs. And a very popular sign in a chaotic world that we live in is "my body, my choice." My body, my choice. Now, in some ways, I agree. We just went through COVID. Should you get a vaccine? Not get a vaccine, right? No, my body, my choice. We love it then, right? But here's the thing. When we're talking about my body, my choice related to abortion, the problem is the baby inside that woman is not her body. It has a different identity. It has a completely different DNA. And so this is important to better wrap our minds around. Because for a church, what do? We stand for everyone, including the unborn, because we know this, that our God certainly does. And so we've been talking about in week 1, the first phrase of Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God. We talked about how that establishes a biblical worldview. And so can you see how important Genesis 1 is to having a biblical worldview? It's very clear here. It's incredibly important. It speaks about the value of the unborn. We stand with the unborn. It speaks about the value of both men and women, equal in value, different in function. It speaks about the value of every human race. Every person matters. No person is greater than someone else. Everyone's equal. No ethnic group is superior. Everyone is created in God's image and God's likeness. And so the Imago Dei gives all humanity dignity and equality. You see, the promise of the gospel is a value that only God can give. And our world does not have this value. By the way, you cannot find this value anywhere else. It doesn't exist in any other way you want to find place your identity in. You won't find it anywhere else but right here in this God who's decided in Genesis 1 to actually create man and women in his image. And so if given a clean slate, what do you want to define your life moving forward? Here's the third thing we'll see, I think, that we would choose is resting in your God-ordained purpose. Look at chapter 2 with me. I wish we had more time to spend on the seventh day. We might pick it up a little bit next week. But it says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day. He made it holy because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, that God has finished creating. Yet there's something else that he creates in day 7. There's something else. Did you see the word rest appear 2 times? It shows up 2 times. In those 3 verses, the rest actually references a Sabbath rest. God is actually introducing something beautiful into creation. You see, every day, days 1 through 6, God speaks, God creates. But on day 7, God's quiet. He doesn't speak. Which I think by not creating, by having no activity, he's actually creating with his non-activity. He's creating something and ordaining something called rest. So days 1 through 6, lots of activity. Day 7, no activity. You see, I think what God is doing in day 7 is God is emphasizing more than activity and more than speech. He's emphasizing who he actually is. And he's emphasizing something very important for you and I that we struggle with. And that is this, right? We struggle with doing over being. And God is saying this 7th day is about you being, not doing. It's resting over restlessness. Can we just acknowledge that we're tired sometimes? Anyone here want to say that? Like our schedules, our life, in this world that we live in, we're going 1,000,000 miles an hour in all these different kinds of directions. And so we are restless. We're tired in many ways, but ultimately what also speaks to our restlessness is our own sin. And so Sabbath, this rest, is actually reminding us what's most important is who we are, not what we actually do. And here's the beauty of rest. It's a gift from God. He's created it for you to enjoy. He's created it for you to experience him in very specific and clear ways. You see, God rested from his creating activity. And so here's the beauty of rest. When we find rest in him, what we're doing is we're fueling our spiritual life. God said 2 things about this day. Did you catch that? God blessed this day, and then God said this day is holy. Now listen, the world hates everything holy. Do you know that? All things holy, the world absolutely hates. But God has said this. He has set this day apart for his people, his creation, to rally their hearts around him. Think about the Israelites. We talked about this of who was receiving the book of Genesis in the context of the Bible. We can think about the Israelites who have served over 400 years in slavery. How many rest days do you think Pharaoh gave them? Probably not very many, right? They were created, and according to Pharaoh, to serve the Egyptians and to make bricks without straw. So I'm sure they didn't get a lot of rest days in their life. They were probably overworked, right? In fact, they worked 146,000 days without rest. They missed 28,000 Sabbath rests. And God is saying this, come find rest from your slavery. And then they're wandering in the wilderness later because they're disobedience. And God is saying, come find rest from your wandering. And God is telling us today to find rest in him. And so I want you to notice a key phrase in verse 2 to me. There's this key phrase where it says this, on the 7th day, here's the phrase, God finished his work. Hey church, God did not rest because he was tired. He did not rest because he needed to sleep, he needed to take a nap, he needed to go on vacation, right? Those things aren't what this actually means. While those things are important, that's not what rest is. What does rest actually mean? You see, often in our world, if you grew up in West Michigan, rest meant you couldn't spend money on Sunday, and you certainly could not mow the grass. You can have no fun. right? That's what it is. That's what it was here for a long time. But the word rest actually means to cease from something. To cease from what? I think it's ceasing from our regular rhythm of our life that is super busy and overscheduled, and we're finding our time just to trust God in the details of life that provide anxiety in our own hearts. You see, I think resting is actually enjoying the presence of God and celebrating his faithfulness in your heart and in your life, which then means this: the more trusting God you have, the more rest you'll have. The more you doubt God, the less it'll be restless. Resting is the result of stopping to do and starting to be. So if we look at the created order from day 1 to day 7, we could then say this, that God has absolutely created a work week for us. It was established before sin entered the world. But let's talk about our work week for a moment. Don't we typically work really hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and just hoping to get some kind of break on the weekend? Hopefully we can have rest on the weekend. That's how it is for us. We work and then rest. That's not how God created it. God created you to work from rest. And so our schedule and how we live life and how we think is actually backwards to what the Bible actually has in mind for you and I. And so imagine being Adam and Eve. God creates Adam and Eve. He says, I want you to have dominion over the earth. I want you to subdue it. I want you to care for it. And I could just see Adam being like, okay, here we go. Let's go get our tools out. He go gets the shovel. All right, come back to God. God, what do you want us to do? You've told us you want us to have dominion, to subdue, to rule over this creation. We're ready to get to work. And God says this, Adam, you need to put your tools down. You need to put your tools down, Adam. Go ahead. Put them down. And I could hear Adam saying, where do you want us to start, God? No. You're not hearing me, Adam. I want you to put your tools down, because the first thing you're going to do is rest. Why? Again, a gospel pattern being set up in day 7 that is so vital to understanding the gospel, and that is this, that God does the work. We receive the blessing. Adam, there's no work for you to do this first day. I've done it all. Just take a breather. I'm not even tired. No, spend time with me, he's saying. Celebrate this reality that the gospel work is already finished. In other words, you and I, we don't work for rest, we work from rest. You see, God worked for rest so we can work from rest. And so this day then flows out of God's love for you. He wants you to enjoy his love by doing things that you love to do. And so what's the purpose of the rest? I think the purpose of the rest is really, it's not an antidote to tiredness. The purpose of rest is this: it's to deal with our anxiety. It's to deal with what overwhelms us in our hearts and in our life, our trouble, our stress, our busyness. And so rest, by God giving it to us, is a sign that he's absolutely for us. I think rest is us coming to God and realigning our hearts with him as we cast our cares upon him. God, here's the details of life that I'm dealing with right now. I have no idea how this is going to come together. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, God. I'm overwhelmed. I feel like everything's caving in on me. God says this: cast your cares upon me. I am God. Rest. It's a blessing. Rest is worship of God. It's worry-free. It's anxiety-free. It's a way for Adam and Eve to do what? To get their focus off their creation, off the created work they're doing, and get their eyes back on the Lord and be like, oh yeah, he's good. He's right. He's helpful. He's encouraging. He declares my identity. And so when we rest well, which I struggle with resting, and I'm sure you do too, when we rest well, here's the reminder: your sin doesn't define you. The reminder is this, is that your sin doesn't get the last say in your life. When we rest well, here's what we're being reminded of: that Jesus was victorious. He wins, he rules, he reigns. By the way, Satan will do everything he can to stop you from experiencing this rest. He's been doing it from the very beginning. He wants you busy. He wants you distracted. He wants you anxious. He wants you stressed out. Is he winning? Because I see it often in my own heart. I want you to notice another pattern that gets broken here on the seventh day. We read through the created order, Genesis 1 through now, looking at days 1 through 7. And after day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, God says this, and there was evening and morning that day. Notice in day 7, that's not there. There is no evening and morning on the seventh day. What's the point of that? The point is this, is that God is in an eternal state of rest. He's in an eternal state of rest. And we can argue that, man, Genesis 3 is the next chapter. Everything's going to go terrible. God's going to send his son Jesus to save the whole world, right? To offer forgiveness from our sins. That's what he's going to do. And it sounds like it was crazy work. It was painful work. But listen, God was working then from his rest. He's inviting us into it. By the way, we turn to the book of Revelation and we see what it'll be like for all eternity. It's going to be an eternal state of rest. So what God's doing now is what he's going to do for all eternity. And so our gospel takeaway this morning is this, is the one who designs you, defines you. Listen, do you want a clean slate this morning? What have we seen from the book of Genesis? Let's break down God's design. God's design is that he's created you in his image. God's design is this, is that he just wants to bless your life. He wants to continue to give you who he is, bless you life in every way. And then here's what God is doing, and he's actually offering you rest. Freedom from the life that we live in this world. But I also want you to notice this. Not only has God designed you in a specific way, but he's also defining you. And so you have a God-given identity that defines you. No one else gets to say who you are but him. We also have this beauty of what defines us is that we have this God-given value and we have this God-given purpose. You see, everything we've ever been looking for in our entire life is found in the gospel. And so have you embraced the identity that only Jesus can give? I don't know about you, but I've allowed many things to define my life in many different ways. And every time those things are fleeting. It doesn't actually end well. And every time I allow something to define my life outside of Jesus, it leaves me feeling depleted and defeated and discouraged. It actually leaves me in a place of chaos because those things are often void of God. But I want you to know something. It's okay. It's okay, because on this very day, the slates can be wiped clean, because here's the good news. You can never out-sin the cross. You can't actually do it. And so whenever you're ready to return, God is saying, return to me, come to me, and actually find rest. Come enjoy me. And here's the invitation. The invitation goes out to sinners only, just in case you didn't know. Sinners only can find a home. Sinners only are welcomed home. And we have purpose in this world. If you know Christ, the Spirit's in you, you have a God-given purpose with how you live your life. In the face of all that's chaotic in our world, how we represent Jesus in the world really matters. But that's where our purpose lies. We have an identity there that's incredibly important. And so I encourage you to surrender your life to Jesus, to make him your identity. Let's pray. Jesus, I want to thank you for your word. I want to thank you for a message that was given thousands of years ago that is maybe one of the most relevant messages of the day. Lord, my heart is heavy in the world that we live in. It's chaotic. It's anti-you. But Lord, how you've called us to live as Christians is very clear. And so I pray, Lord, that we will live life on purpose. You've given us a life to live, that we won't have a life full of regret, but we'll have a life full of trust. And I'm so grateful, Lord, that when I look at my rearview mirror of sin and brokenness, that those are not the things that define me, that you step in and you declare your love and your care and your forgiveness again to us. We love you, Jesus. In your name, amen.